my friends. Welcome to the Reasonable Truth Podcast, a program dedicated to helping Christians to understand, articulate, and defend their faith as winsome ambassadors of Christ. It is good to be back here again today. It's been a while since we've done our last podcast, and this one's going to be special. We're kind of digressing a little bit away from some of our usual topics, but nonetheless, I do think it's a very important topic for the Christian church. I think Christians need to understand what's going on with this. And so without further ado, let me get into some introductions. My partner in crime there, Carlos Pamplona, is with us today. Hey, buddy. Thank you for being us.
Hey, man. Thanks for, I'm excited for today.
All right. Sounds good. And our special guest for today is Professor Kevin Lewis. He's a professor of theology and law in the Christian Apologetics in Science and Religion program at Talbot School of Theology, Biola University. Professor Lewis's research interests include the fields of polemical and eclectic theology, systematic theology, Christian apologetics, theology and law integration, and jurisprudence and public policy. He is also the founder and president of the Institute for Theology and Law, www.itlnet.org. I'll make sure to put all those descriptions and the links in our description section. And this organization was formed to equip Christians with resources to engage the church and culture in the fields of law, justice, and public policy from a foundation of Christian theology. Professor Lewis, thank you for joining us.
Hey, very well. Sounds like you have my bio there you were reading.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Going straight from your bio. It's when a person's bio is that long, it's best to just read it verbatim. So thank you.
Let me summarize. Blah, blah, blah. We love God and hate evil, and we're going to serve Christ. There it is. There's the bio.
There we go.
Don't compromise.
There we go. That's exactly right.
Keep it simple.
That's right. And so, most people who know you, who have listened to you, they know who you are, they know what your areas of specialty are and things like that. But there's going to be a significant audience today who have never heard you before. So as I just read from your description, they now have a general idea that, you wear a theologian's hat and you may wear an attorney's suit. But after today's episode, they're going to realize that you also have a Ghostbuster Proton Blaster pack attached to you as well. That too. Too, right, exactly. So we're going to deal with demonology and the occult today. So before we actually kind of dive into the darkness, if you will, let me say this. I think it was in your class that Carlos and I first met. Is that correct, Carlos?
That's right. Back in 2012 in the fall.
Was that the scripture canon authority class?
It was, yes.
It wasn't the carne asada culinary class. So
no, that was years down the line.
That was years down the line. Okay,
yeah,
got it.
If I only knew there was a class like that. All right. Anyways, that's the
Carlos
class.
got that class.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so that's where Carlos and I met, and of course you joined us a few months ago, back in June, for our first live conference at Biola. So that was wonderful. So it's really great to have you join us on our podcast. So let me start off with just a really basic question. What got you into this subject?
Well, that is a good question. And there's actually a lot of reasons that got me into the subject. But before I begin, you said this isn't your normal topics. What are the other topics you've covered before this? So I can assume your longtime listeners have some background or something on this. What are some of the stuff you've covered before this?
Oh, just kind of all kinds of other like cultural issues. Like last time we had on Finney Premkumar, I think, and we talked about the world of scientism and transhumanism and things like that. And before that, I had Harry Edwards on, and we talked about Gen Z and stuff like that. So this definitely strays a little away from those kind of topics, but still important.
Yeah, Saint Harry, so of apologetics.com. I've heard of that guy. So anyway, all right, well, good. On this topic, it's like I said in my introduction. I mean, I actually got saved, when I was 23 years old. I didn't grow up a Christian. So when I became a believer at age 23, it was sort of like, oh, okay, eyes open. And what can I say? I admit, even if government watchers are listening, that I'm an extremist. Okay, I mean, the thing is, if God is real and God is true, then God is ultimate, and there is no compromise. It's truth and error. It's love versus hate. It's evil versus good, and there's just no waffle room on this. You either really believe it and are committed, or you're not. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with this generation is that you say, well, I'm a Christian, but where's the consistency in all areas of your life? Do you really understand what that means? Do you understand the eternal consequence of hell and pain and suffering and lies and all this? Because since this stuff is true, first class condition, right? Indicative is that it means that this is everything. This is infinite blessing versus infinite punishment and consequence. So this is what initially, as a new Christian, I just think in extremes like that. So what reoriented me was, well, I want to know the truth, and I want to know the truth and be able to defend it against every lie and every possible thing. And once we get the truth that, look, there's an ultimate good, but there's also evil. Evil divides in a fallen world into three basic levels. Okay. We have intellectual evil. So I said, okay, what do I got to go do? Learn the Bible, learn theology, and do apologetics and polemic and alenctic theology. Know how to proclaim the truth about the most important things, God, Christ, Holy Spirit, salvation, and be able to refute the error. But the other areas of dealing with evil and fallenness is physical evil. I mean, crime, especially violent crime. It's like, Carlos does martial arts and everything else. Say, look, why? Because we recognize there's evil in the world. And not only do you have to defend yourself theologically with apologetics, you got to defend yourself physically and your family for self-defense and defense of others. But a third area that for a lot of reasons is not as much emphasized in the modern, and I don't even like the word evangelical anymore because there's about 8 different meanings of it, but in the modern Orthodox Protestant church, call it, the non-Pentecostal, non-charismatic Orthodox Protestant churches, there tends to be not as much discussion on the spiritual world and the supernatural world, the world of demons, the world of Satan. And even then, we talk about theologically, philosophically, the importance of substance dualism, the place of angels, all of that. It tends to get a diminished discussion in non-Pentecostal, non-charismatic churches. But you read the Bible, especially the Gospels, and you find out that is probably one of the biggest sources of evil is, you have demons and Satan that are lying, tempting, deceiving. Even though if we locked up all the demons and Satan himself, fallen human beings can create enough lies and hatred and everything else to ruin the human race. So a proper positive way forward is not only to know how to defend yourself, to know the truth about all those realms, but also to be able to defend yourself intellectually, spiritually, and physically. So growing in full maturity as a disciple of Christ is going to involve all those areas. So that's one of the reasons why when I became a Christian, I was interested in that. And then to back up, I just had stuff in my past before I was a Christian. I had, sisters who played with Ouija boards when I was growing up. We had weird stuff going on in our house while they're playing with Ouija boards. We had, manifestation, possessed cats. I don't know if that's a redundancy, a possessed cat, but but literally, and then people, just encounters with that kind of stuff. So that was one, because I knew there was a supernatural world and I knew there was supernatural evil. So immediately upon becoming a Christian, I was among all my other interests, I was interested in that as well. And then since then, one thing that's true of my, many, seminary grad students over the last 30 years is that the fact is God will bring ministries to you. You have your calling, your interest, your research areas, and at the same time, God's just going to put people in your path to minister to. And so, like I said, my Cults of America class, most people are not experts on Mormons. We're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff in the cults class, but the second you have a friend, a family member, your wife, your kid, or someone else that joins the LDS church, all of a sudden it's like, now that's my ministry. I'm going to be the number one expert on
Right.
how to deal with, evangelizing people in the LDS church. So when you get somebody who's involved with witchcraft, you get someone who's claiming they hear voices and that they seem to have psychological problems that aren't dealt with by normal, psychological means. That's when all of a sudden you can have multiple research interests and practice areas, but then you're going to begin to develop, hopefully minimally, a competency in that area, which will eventually become an expertise.
Okay, well that makes sense. And so let's talk about something that you mentioned a little earlier. You said that our the Pentecostals, the charismatics, kind of tend to talk about this stuff more than the nons on the other side. Why is that? Why are the non-Pentecostals or the non-charismatics? Why are they not talking about this stuff as much? Is it kind of a reaction to the other side, or what's going on there?
Um, Again, we could take the rest of the the broadcast on that, but um, there are a couple of things going on, and because to really understand that, you have to look at just with Protestantism, right? Um, today is Reformation Day, right? So
That's
what we
right.
had hey, we take Western Roman Catholicism, refine it with our solas for the Reformation. But if you look at the writings of Luther and Calvin and their robust entire worldview Protestant orthodoxy, they saw that Christianity, they believed the whole Bible, they weren't selective, and they know that the Bible applied to every area of life. It wasn't just the church and making disciples, it was family, it was government, it was an entire worldview. It wasn't reduced to just a gospel message. So Luther had a lot of stuff to say on the devil. Calvin had a lot of stuff to say on the devil. The Protestant scholastics had their robust angelologies. You get into, you get to that, then you get to the 18th century and Enlightenment, modernism, and liberalism. So then what you had is now this rationalism and virtually, default anti-supernaturalism and natural law approach, where you've rejected scripture and you've rejected supernatural, and now whatever passed the test of reason counts as the faith. Fast forward to the fundamentalist renewals of the 20th century, and here's where you had folks who had either been kicked out or left their established Protestant denomination saying, we got to save the faith. So they go and they reestablish places like Biola, Multnomah, Wheaton. And so now we've got these 10 or 12 fundamentals of the faith that, instead of Christianity essentially being, here's an entire worldview, what we're doing now is we're focusing on preserving the essence of the faith. And that turned into a cultural fundamentalism. And a lot of that was because what was developed there was a very protective and defensive attitude about anything that might affect the faith again, because you still remember the wounds of liberalism and the losing of all these great seminaries and denominations are still fresh in the minds of the fundamentalists. So what you've got now are, for example, remember, late 1800s, that's when we have Darwin for the first time. So now we're getting into, the 1920s and the Scopes trial. And, hey, can Christianity, pass the test of science? Is it reasonable, right? So what you end up with is a disaster at the Scopes trial. And so what you have is a lot of folks saying, okay, well, anyone who's an old earth creationist, they must be closet evolutionist. See, there's all of these very wary presumptions because we lost all these institutions before. So there's sort of an over guardianship to preserve the faith. And
Right.
at the same time, around 1915, late 1906 Azusa Street revivals, that's where we see, this revival of, hey, what we should be doing is what the first century is doing, as far as all the sign gifts and all the signs and wonders. And then now, of course, what that ends up producing are some orthodox, first wave Pentecostal groups. and then some very unorthodox ones where everybody's claim, now everyone's a prophet, everyone's claiming words of knowledge.
Right.
And so again, there ends up being a very, I think, a defensive reaction to that. So the Orthodox fundamentalist evangelical wing tended to be very protective of, quote, anything that smacked of new revelation or new interpretation. So that ended up where you saw a high percentage of cessationists that were, being, part of, even in the dispensational part of the church. And then, you get some, Orthodox, covenant folks who are, full preterists and, well, we're already in the millennium and Satan's locked up. We don't have any demons.
Right. Right.
So there are a lot of reasons why we've ended up in sort of the non-Pentecostal, non-charismatic wing of the church, where there's less emphasis on spiritual warfare, spiritual encounters, and so forth.
Definitely a state of affairs that the enemy would like for us to be in, for sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Carlos, any thoughts? Anything you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just thinking that's the one extreme. Now, how does a person that is not privy to this understanding that they should consider the scriptures in their entirety, and they're not operating, or if they even are operating off of that rationalistic view, how do they go about to distinguish between it is a spiritual manifestation or even a spiritual encounter against some type of psychological issue? How do we distinguish between those two?
Yeah, and eventually, I mean, as we go through when I teach the full class on demonology and occult, and when I first designed the course, it was the full 3 hours a week, 15 weeks, and we had about 45 hours of lecture on that. The first phase of that, and this is for us as, if we're going to really be sola scriptura Protestants, is we start with what the Bible has to say on the subject and what it clearly says. So this is why step one on even answering that question is, what are the abilities or causal powers of angels and demons? And I say that even though that people with Michael Heiser's books and works and things like that was sort of, newer understandings of what demons are. The fact is that I'm so convinced the traditional view of Catholics, Protestants is that, look, demons are fallen angels. And I think there's still overwhelmingly good reasons to believe that. And even if Heiser's views are correct, that you have these other created spirits that aren't part of the angel class, they're still spirits. They're still made in the image of God. They still can be elect and fallen, and they're still under the authority of God and would be in God's disciplines, even though you'd argue they're not directly mentioned in the Bible. So from that, assuming that demons are fallen angels with good reasons, you look at all of angelology and demonology to see what kind of effects can angels actually produce in the world, that angel class of being actually produce in the world and with human beings. And once you've done that, now you can deal with the question of, when you deal with a counselee or you're analyzing a situation, you can at least answer the question, is it potentially a genuine supernatural encounter and real? Because it's biblically possible that these effects can be produced, which again is a supernatural work, which is an effect in human beings and in the physical created world. We distinguish, divine miracles, right, an act of divine omnipotence directly versus mirabilia, an amazing work of supernaturalism that's extraordinary, that's done by an angel or a demon, that isn't done by, again, that's not human in origin, and it's not part of the common, common works of the psychosomatic human world and the physical world. So you go through that, and then you say, okay, then you go through after you've done that, the important thing is, now the biggest thing is, as Christians, what does it mean to have authority over the demons? So we get into matching that up with occult phenomenology, occult practices. Because when you're talking to a witch, a ceremonial magician, someone who practices Santeria, and they say, I experienced this is what I saw or what I experienced. You've got a biblical basis for saying, okay, and by the way, that's part of being just good biblical counselor. You figure out who's lying, who's manipulating. Who's a good witness? Where is this hearsay? Was this your direct experience? Do you have a motive to lie? Once you filtered all that out, you think the person is at least genuinely telling the truth, and they've told you something that is at least permissible to say this could be real, and real in the sense of they experience a genuine supernatural encounter or experience and describe the effect or the phenomena accurately. Okay. Now, and that's why some people make a distinction of real versus true, even though in a correspondence theory of truth, real equals true, where truth is a property of propositions that correspond to reality. So in this case, though, you can have someone who has a genuine or real encounter with the supernatural and can describe the effect. But see, someone who practiced, say, Hermetic or ceremonial witchcraft would give a different worldview explanation of why it worked the way it worked. They wouldn't say, yeah, demon produced this effect. They would say they tapped into their, astral power and channeled it through their wand, through their will, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, they had a real encounter, but their understanding of it is not true. It doesn't correspond with the actual reality of it. So, so fast forward now you get to Carlos's question on this. Ultimately, when you get to the spiritual warfare, spiritual conflicts, and counseling aspect of these things, a lot of occult phenomena and powers can be mimicked, right, by psychosis, by dissociative disorders. Is it a demon or is it a dissociative disorder, aka multiple personality disorder? And this is why, again, there are a couple of good psychologists out there, and I'm going to recommend some books on this later. But essentially, one of the key biblical ways to start kind of filtering out, is this real or not, is, and this is, forget trying to convince a skeptic. We're talking doing ministry now. Because the fact is, trying to convince a skeptic, if you're a skeptic or an atheist and you don't want to believe, nothing will convince you. Okay. The question is, can you give, as you say, reasonable truths in sufficient quantity, right, to the level of persuasion necessary for a reasonable person to believe that this is what happened? Okay. Not some extraordinary standard that shouldn't be imposed on the situation. So with that, it comes down to, well, you have to know what a demon is and what their motives are. Because for you to start running through tests for these things, not only do you run it through the biblical possibilities where things would hopefully be extraordinary, but ultimately, what do you have? You have think about this, you have a criminal without a body who's doing an act here. So what do criminals do? Right. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they hate, they're selfish, they do all these things, they deceive. And so what do? Satan is a liar and the father of lies. The number one weapon of demons and Satan is that they're very convincing liars.
Right.
And that's why, I've dealt with people for the last 30 years that, they went to, literally like a Kenneth Copeland Word of Faith, and they claim that, an archangel entered into them and it's now their spirit guide.
Right.
And of course it wasn't. But, because God is a man and we're little gods, and, you can confess things into existence isn't the gospel. And that's a different Jesus and another gospel. And as 2 Corinthians 11 says, you get a different Jesus and a different gospel. You also get a different spirit with that.
Right.
And so the test ultimately is, can you say there's another person here, as opposed to all the phenomena can be accounted for by one person, which is the person who's the counselee? I mean, and while there's a lot of ways to apply that, if you've gotten to the point where someone, for example, has knowledge that they couldn't possibly have, that says there's another mind or another person present who's providing that knowledge.
Right. So let's talk about some of those identifying markers. And this is one of the kind of the technicalities of this topic that Carlos brought up. Is I've read some studies about how the brain chemistry, the neurology, or the parts of the brain that kind of light up for a person who's struggling with some sort of psychosis or some sort of mental health issue is very similar to a person who's in the throes of possession. And now, this is not to say that there are not clear identifying markers of possession. Like you said, astral knowledge, the ability to know things that are happening far away in real time. That's not, there's no scientific explanation for that. Similarly, superhuman strength. Similarly, the knowledge of like languages that they have never studied before. Like these are all very clear markers, I think, of possession, but it still makes it a little fuzzy, right? Like, so for example, a movie like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, I think, is a movie that captured this kind of the blurry line between where does medical psychosis stop and where does possession begin. Can you speak to that a little bit, and how do we discern?
Yeah, well, and that's where you got to remember, for every analysis, there's going to be, the clearly yes, clearly no, and then the wobbly stuff in the middle. That's going to lead, you're going to, and this is where the probabilistic types of epistemology come in, is, at what point do you say this is true, it's a warranted belief, we make an assertion, again, we find that, yes, the person is possessed. But, and this is also too, what's important here is that we're going to back up and do some biblical anthropology, because when you talk about this, you have to talk about the constitution of man or human beings. What are we? I mean, we are body, soul, spirit, intellect, will, emotions, heart. As while we have substance dualism, we are a holistic union, and so, and that's why, yes, there's always going to be, on the physicalist side, on the physical side, in substance dualism, yes, I mean, we know a lot about biology and neurology, and every your pituitary gland produces how many different kinds of hormones and how many different kinds of things. So I mean, Carlos, yeah, you're in the medical field, you can speak to that pretty well. So, but one of the things that has to really be considered here is that, remember, is that psychosomatic issues are the body affects the soul and the soul affects the body. I mean, if you worry too much, you get an ulcer. That's psychosomatic. That is a soulish activity producing a bodily effect. So, and it goes back and forth in human nature. Now, that said, you mentioned, that there are certain measurements and certain brain activities and things like that quote, mimic, okay, supposedly mimic it, but is it mimicking? Because when you're dealing with, and this is where you get into the other issue of, well, what does it mean to be acted upon by a demon? See, the Gerasene, Gadarene, demoniac accounts in the Bible are normally what people call possession, okay? But the word itself, daimonidzomai, okay? It simply means, I mean, the idzomai is the passive, and it's the daimon, okay, that's acting on you. And so there isn't really a word possessed, okay? In the Bible, it's either you're acted upon by a demon, daimonidzomai, or the person had a demon or had an evil spirit. But it's only from the context of the scriptures that you see the level of activity that goes on. So this is why, even before we get to this stage, this is why we have to do so much theology, is that, what is a demon? What are their causal powers? What is human nature? And all these things. For example, when you get to human nature, for example, we know, take the Gerasene, Gadarene, demoniac accounts in the Gospels, and what you have what you have there is clearly, you have a human being who's alive, but that particular demon or demons plus, remember, because, I am legion, we are many. How many demons were there? 1,000, 10,000. Why? Because, back to our great theology days, illocal and definitive presence. They don't have a local presence and corporeal extension. So how many demons can dance on the head of a pin? Answer, all of them. Okay. So, but in this case, what's important is that, see, we talk about in human beings, what's biological life and death biblically. God formed man from the dust of the ground, breathed into him the spirit of life. And when there's that psychosomatic union, you see activity in the body in biological life. And that's why when we measure life and death, just in the medical field and legal field, you have, every state has a death statute, and death statutes are defined ultimately by electroencephalograms, electrocardiograms. And when you have no activity for a certain amount of time, then that's death. But what does that mean biblically? It means now the spirit is not in that psychosomatic union, right, with the body. So that's why when we start defining, so now when you look at what we would call possession or sort of an ultimate control of a person, what's important is that the direct and immediate control is of a person's body. So like the Gerasene Gadarene demoniac accounts, what do you see? They're controlling their limbs, they're speaking through the body. So, and I think it's important too to not think of demons, and if Satan is an archangel, that's still yet to be determined, but at least he's a powerful angel who fell. And what you have are demons aren't omniscient, and demons are like us. They have to learn one thought at a time.
Right.
And arguably, they would have different gifts and emphases, just like, you have cherubs that seem to have a protecting guardian function and seraphs who have the choir function. So whether or not, so I don't think we need a cookie cutter approach to angels and demons and emphases. So that said, is it intuitive for every demon that they know that place of psychosomatic union to be able to possess someone? Probably, maybe not. But
Right.
at least some of them have learned to do it. And then the question is based on same stuff, the law of God. Demons seem to be under the same sentence that unbelieving humans are under, in the sense that right now, the way is narrow that leads to life and few will find it. And you can argue the vast majority of people on earth don't know God and won't know God. Yet they're
Right.
not in hell right now. Yet they have freedom to sin every single day against God and live life in community with the rest of us, as long as they don't go past certain sins. So, you can lie to your wife, you can, do all sort. Don't do it though. It's a bad idea. Okay. So,
Yeah, don't.
Carlos was taking notes there. It's like, no, hey, don't take
Bad.
that.
Don't do this.
That's bad. Don't do that. Okay. But boy, there's a ton of sins you get away with every day. Sins in your thought life, sins in this, sins in that, sins of omission. And yet we still live on earth. Now, again, the few glimpses we get with the demons is they seem to have that same kind of freedom where they get to interact, sin, as long as they don't, so, when you see the Gerasene Gadarene demoniac account, they say, have you come to torment us before the day? Where there are, capital crimes for demons, just like there are capital crimes for humans. See,
Not to mention, can we also say that, I've always been profoundly impressed by how good of a Christology these demons have compared to a lot of the other people who surrounded Jesus at that time.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I said you got to lay a lot of theological foundations. They have direct perception of the spiritual world. Demons are Trinitarians. Demons know Christ as a God-man. See, their theology is much better, but they still don't have faith. That's the problem. They have more clarity on the Trinity than anybody alive today has.
That's right.
But they have no faith. They hate God and they don't believe it. They're not committed to it. So this is why when we look at this, there seems to be crimes, felonies, death penalties for demons where, human beings, you commit a misdemeanor or felony, you can get a temporary timeout. You don't get to play anymore with the rest of the human beings for 3 months, a year, 10 years, but then you can go back once your sentence is done. And then there's the death penalty. You committed such an egregious crime that you're done. You don't get to play anymore. And the few glimpses we get of the demonic world, they like I said, they're criminals without bodies who, as long as they exist in their sin within certain limits, they get to be active and free and sin. What God allows us in his permissive decree to constantly sin against each other and other beings made in his image. So this is why when we get to that question, you get to at least, I think you get to a lot to the issue of permission, like, and that seems to be a recurring issue that, like, Satan asking permission to torment Job.
Right.
Or even if it's done by deception, fraud, duress, and that's why there's a big overlap between sin and crime, Because remember, Satan is a liar and the father of lies. So what you have are deception crimes, ultimately, that demons do. They're liars, they're frauds, they're con artists. Okay. So this is why when we see that sort of activity or behavior, what you're going to get is like I said, I mean, someone, like I said, I mean, one of my cases I dealt with, someone went to one of these word of faith things. They were told, which they're little gods, and you can be a little god. And if you open yourself up, you can get your own archangel or angel spirit guide. And I was teaching a Sunday school class, and one of the people said, man, I got this friend who they went to one of these things. And ever since she went there, she's been completely off. She goes literally in and out. She'll be normal 1 minute, and then her eyes roll back, and she's, flipping around, different personality. Why? Because she invited an angel into her to be her guide. But it made her feel special,
right,
that she had her own angel, and the angel would talk to her. And so, because I did a counseling session with this person, with the guy from my Bible class present, and this person would be, rational and like, yeah, I went here. No, we don't do that.
right.
It's just, and you can see the flip. But see, and this is why the history is also important. What did they do? What were they involved with? What Ouija board were they playing with before? Because there's always a triggering event to real demonic activity.
That's right.
So along the lines of that, something came up. You mentioned the word dianomitomai, which some would say is demonization. Now, when I talk to certain people, some have this idea that if you're a Christian, demons cannot touch you, period. Others say that, yeah, they can. So the question is demonization and possession, now possession not in terms of ownership, but to be acted upon, right? You're the passive, you're passively being acted upon. Is there a difference between the two? And can Christians be demonized or possessed, if there's a difference?
I thought you said
let's define demonization first.
Well, I was going to say, I thought this interview was only an hour and a half to 2 hours, man. You want me to cover all that?
No. Well, you know how we like to do it. This is like a 16-week class that you usually teach, and we know how much you love to do it in 1.5 hours. So there you go.
Okay, well, I'll kind of ask for it about this, and we'll talk about demon possession and everything else, and So yeah,
it sounds like an insurance commercial, right?
Yeah. Or I rebuke thee. I rebuke thee.
Well, I rebuketh thee back. So all right. So anyway, so as we were talking about Gerasene, Gadarene, demoniac, that is sort of the worst case scenario version of being acted upon by a demon, where a demon or more than one demon actually has full control of your body. And what's important there is your body. They know that place of psychosomatic interaction and union. And that's why we went into the permission aspect. Is, well, what does that mean? Someone was playing with the occult. They invited him in. They invited him to be the vessel of the God, little g God. I mean, frankly, often that's how this stuff works. And that's why a lot of the pagan, neo-pagan religions, like, Santeria and so forth, what are you doing? You're asking the God to possess you, to give you power. But you think this is a benevolent little g God, powerful spirit, where you and your selfishness, you want to do your magic, so you're asking the God to possess you as a source of power. But it's not you saying, hey, I'm an evil demon who's going to ruin your life. No, I'm a benevolent God who's going to empower you to get what you want. Right. See, that's the deception. So full-blown possession, as we say, is to have full control over your body, and another person is literally using it for the demon's actions. Now, all the way to the other side, we think about, how are we affected by demons? Well, so that's the worst example of direct effect. You back up, you can say there's actually no direct, but only indirect. We live in a fallen, sinful world where the activities of demons, again, where people can choose to hate and be tempted and sin. Well, we live with those effects in a fallen world. And so we start with that. And then there's, depending on who you read on this, there's gradations in between. They're going to be based on, again, what are the activities of a demon? What are the activities of human beings? But you can start with even though you're not possessed, I'd say virtually, I mean, we live as human beings with substance dualism being true. And I'm saying substance dualism, I'm using spirit and soul as, you know, the non-physical substance that's the ground of the rational person. And then, you know, we have the physical body. So substance dualism. So what we have there is, again, what are the actions of rational beings? And that because we live simultaneously, we exist in a spiritual world and a physical world simultaneously. Because we have a spirit, soul, right? We exist in our spirit, in the spirit world. Yet, because of our physicality, at least in this stage of our existence, I think that's going to change in glorification, where I think we'll have dual perception of the spirit and the physical. But right now, you have occlusion, you have hiddenness
Right.
of the spiritual, but yet we exist in the spirit world, and we know that, you know, somehow demons, angels, whatever. And that's why I said there's a lot of biblical groundwork that has to be laid. Not only God, but angels and demons can, quote, come to you in dreams, come to you in visions, come to you, which is what? It's a spiritual, intellectual state rather than a physical. That's perception and interaction that's done spiritually rather than empirically in the physical world. So you start with indirect effects of demons, but then you can just have one spirit talking to another spirit.
Right.
You don't have to control someone. And this is where, again, there's enough evidence for that, where, look, I mean, Jesus in his humanity, right? The temptation of Christ in Matthew 4, the devil himself was chatting it up with Jesus according to his humanity.
That's right.
Now, in that case, you have a sinless person with no inclination to give in to the test, but you had direct communication of an evil spirit, okay, with Christ. You had direct communication of, now again, you know, snake in the garden possessed by Satan, however that works, but you had communication that went to Eve.
Right.
Directly. So that's the next level, is you can say, look, at what point do you have demonic communication? And we see, I think it's accurate that the warnings of, you know, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. Say, you know, Satan moved David to number the troops of Israel. Take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ to avoid the schemes of the devil.
Means
That
like
word,
a roaring lion. Yeah.
yeah. But that word, I mean, in the context, their schemes is actually the biblical word for mind. It's nous, noetic. So the mind games, the intellectual, you know, evil mind games of the devil, which implies what? Communication. So this is why, you know, being so first is just having a biblical worldview, which is going to get, you know, to our next issues. Can Christians be demon possessed? I don't see, just based on Christ, Eve, statements like Satan's out like a roaring lion, you know, resist him firm in the faith. You look at all this stuff going on. I mean, look, Acts 16, the you know, slave girl with the demon, the spirit of divination, yakking it up at Paul. I mean, the fact
Right.
is that there isn't a, you know, a goal, there isn't you know, whatever you want to call it, a force bubble around us that prevents, you know, demons from communicating, from doing all sorts of stuff. In fact, to me, that never made any sense, because fact is, God doesn't protect us from human evil.
Right.
I mean, the very fact that human beings do all sorts of evil to one another, and, you know, and we live in two worlds simultaneously. It's like, our problem is that the vast majority of the world, and you can argue even the church today, is just unaware they actually live in a spiritual world. And you've got spiritual criminals and physical criminals that you have to be aware of.
Which
So,
I actually think is a good segue into this point, and I wanna touch on this before we go into our break. But um, I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's quote about, you know, I think he says this in the beginning of Screw Tape Letters. He talks about two extremes that we tend to take. Is one is to
yeah,
not believe in the devil at all, and the other is, I believe he says, unhealthy, excessive fascination with it.
that's right.
And which is kind of ironic, because when you look at the world today, we've done exactly what Lewis has warned us not to
Right.
do, right? We have the Enlightenment era fueled rationalistic skepticism on the one side, and then on the other side, there's just this morbid fascination with this kind of stuff. So I'd like you to speak a little bit about the motivations for why people actually get into this. I think Hollywood gets a lot of stuff wrong when it comes to issues like this, but they don't always get everything wrong. Some of it they get right. And one of the things they get right is that when you see any Hollywood movie about, you know, playing with Ouija boards and things like that, they clearly depict that it never ends well for that person. It never ends well. And they actually get that right. So can you speak to kind of what's the motivation for people to get into occultism, the pursuit for knowledge and power, and what's
Yeah.
driving that over there?
Yeah, and that's good. And yeah, the problem with Hollywood is that it used to be, Christian back up until about the 1960s. And there actually, if you look at the history on this, there was actually a film commission in Hollywood up until 1965. You had Catholics, Protestants, and Jews that would review scripts and movies and things like that, because you
Really?
quote unquote had this, Bible believing, at least, and even back then, you got to remember, you look at classic modernism or liberalism in the church, you're looking at people who still believed in God, still believed, in marriages between a man and a woman, and they would look. I mean, even though they were heretics on the Trinity and the deity of Christ and miracles, they would look like uber super moral conservatives today.
That's right.
So this is why you had this film commission. They stopped that in 1965, and then 1966 you start to see, just more and more movies about the devil, the glorification of the devil. And Rosemary's Baby is one of the first ones that comes out. And then you start see, and then The Exorcist, and then so The Omen.
Right.
And you start to see as they get worse and worse, because you don't see this omnipotent Christ who's kind of flicking the devil into the lake of fire at the end. You see this, it's reduced from, it's still supernatural, but it's almost a dualism where Christ and Satan are virtually equals, and Christ barely wins in the end. And then
Right. Not to mention they would also think it probably makes for poor TV, right? They would rather see a girl crawl up the walls or something and scream instead of seeing the power of God just deliver someone from possession.
Yeah, instead of, Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee versus all criminals in the world, right? Yeah. Yeah. One ranger, one dragon, no criminals left. So that's it. So yeah, but see that, so you saw this diminish it. Part of that had to do with, and again, you have to say why. Again, that's about a 4-hour lecture, so I'll talk really fast right now. One thing that you see in the history of Christianity is that you got to remember, what were the prevalent religions and practices in the world when Christianity was out? It was polytheistic, magical worldview. Virtually everywhere in the world, whether it was Northwestern Europe, whether it was Central Europe, Rome, Greece, whether it was Africa, whether it was in the Americas at the time, what did you see? You saw polytheistic magical paganism. That was the dominant religion in the world. And then you saw this little teeny pocket of Jewish monotheism. And then you see something, that's happening with the Aryans in India, right? About 500 BC-ish, where you start to see something that looks more like pantheistic magical worldview instead of polytheistic worldview, even though the pantheism of Hinduism also looks very polytheistic. But so the entire world is basically under demonic religion. They're under the little g gods, which the Bible makes clear these are demons. Okay, so so you start with that. So what's important is that you look at the history of Christianity. I mean, forget Judaism at this point, but look at the spread of the gospel. Every place where the church was growing and was established, all of a sudden, paganism and the open interaction and practice of demons is gone. So this is why, you read the book of Acts, you look at what's happening, especially in Ephesus and the epistles to the Ephesians, right? The Temple of Artemis was like the occult center of the Roman Empire, and there were multiple names for Artemis, and it was Diana, it was this, but I mean, their trade was basically selling occult stuff throughout the
Right.
empire. And so, and all of a sudden, Paul comes and makes everything bad for business there, right? With the
Right.
gospel. Then what's important is fast forward, every place the church goes, we recognize this as demonic. And you got to remember the people that get involved with this, they're promised the world, but they end up in bondage. And so, and then remember what the same criminals that practice you riches and glory, right? It like you said, in Hollywood, it doesn't end up well. In fact, that's why I really like the Breaking Bad and, other series, because everyone in the series, like you got in the drug trade, it didn't work out very well for you, did it? And that's exactly what happens with, the world of the occult.
Right.
Eventually, you think you're going to make millions, you think you're going to get power and influence, but in the end, there's always a bigger and more powerful criminal than you, and you're going to be their slave. You're going to be in
That's right.
bondage to them. And so what happens is Christianity comes through Christ the deliverer, right? He delivered us from the domain of darkness, not just in the penalty of sin, but also these spiritual oppressors that are around. So in that, again, so what you saw were now, and this is the holistic approach, the conference in June was about civil government, and political theology, because Christians had an integrated worldview. It was like, of course, this isn't just church. We want to live our entire lives, family, community, and church for the true and the living God in Christ. And that
Right.
means, we don't have, quote, freedom of religion. You can't worship the devil in the midst of our community because we don't want you attracting our kids to your satanic cult and to be demonically influenced.
Right.
So that's a huge other topic, because now the big topic is what's freedom of religion. God didn't have a lot of freedom of religion, and there's a lot of it that just doesn't make sense.
Right.
But we need our freedom with respect. If we get to build the community, we want the moral law of God in its relevant part as part of public life and all that. So when you get Constantine now, and now you have a Christianized Roman Empire, now you essentially have the outline of the open practice of these demonic polytheistic religions. So this is where we get the terms occult and pagan now. So now if you're going to practice the old ways, right, the polytheistic magical ways, you either have to do it in secret in the Christian community, hence the term occult, from the Latin occultus, meaning secret or hidden, or you have to get out of town. The Latin word pagan is paganus. It means rural people. These are the people who went to the edges of civilization so they could openly practice their polytheistic magical religion. Hence, they became known as the pagans. They're the rural
Right.
people who practice the old ways. So wherever the church is strong, you see now the occultism going underground and to the outskirts of civilization. Then the devil has a strategy, right? If you can't beat him, join him. So, as I say, doing in apologetics and polemic is our worst enemies are always inside the church. So,
Right.
and by the way, that's the history of God's people from the very first prophet in the Old Testament to the end of the age. It's false prophets coming in amongst us to draw away disciples after themselves to a false God and a false gospel. That's why we have to even more discernment, need to have discernment in the church. So once you ruin the church, people aren't getting saved. They're not regenerate. They're not sure their sins are forgiven. So what you have are whole generations now say, oh, Christianity doesn't work. It didn't work for me. So, and that's what happened with modernism, for example, is where you had strong churches, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox. Again, of course, as Protestants, we're going to disagree, with the important solas between Eastern Orthodoxy and, conservative Catholicism. But at the same time, it's Still today, the Roman Catholics, they believe in the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the atonement, the resurrection, and they probably have the biggest number of exorcists around who are doing this
Right.
stuff.
That's right.
So, but once we got to liberalism and modernism, and in this age, postmodernism, you have a faith that is a false faith. It's not even an impure faith anymore. It's a false faith that doesn't save anyone. So now, quote, Christianity doesn't work. And now what do people do? Now, see, and see, once you get to Christianity isn't true, you go back to pluralism. That's the next stage. And so what we've seen for the last 50 to 100 years is the return of religious pluralism and worldview pluralism, at least in America and in the West. Yeah, you go to, other countries, you go to Saudi Arabia and they don't have pluralism there. So, but you go to America, once you've got metaphysical and epistemic error, right? Now all of a sudden we're not sure what truth is, and if you're a local skeptic in religion or moral knowledge or something like that, so you end up with pluralism. But realists like us know that pluralism never works. All you end up with is fights and civil wars and conflicts. So
Right.
the more you have pluralism now and tolerance, now more that these formerly hidden religions can be advertised and done openly now. And now the question is when do we go into a break? So how much time we have here?
We need to go into a break right now. Go ahead,
Okay.
finish your thought. Yeah.
So, well, then after the break, I'll come back and we'll talk about now what's attractive to people. Why would people do this? See, and of course, it's because Satan is a liar, the father of lies. Satan appears as an angel of light. But what is the attraction of this? Stay tuned. So
Fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot more we need to
okay.
discuss. Obviously, do not get into the occult, people. It is not a fair quid pro quo. It's not as simple as just sell your soul to the devil and let's play the Ouija board and I can talk to grandma. Problem is, it's not grandma and she's never gonna want to leave you even when you're done talking to her. So in any case, we have a lot more to discuss. And after the break, I want to kind of bring this down a little bit and make it more practical. And what can believers take away from this? How does this play out practically in terms of like spiritual warfare and things like that? And so let's do all that. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. So stay tuned. All right, friends, welcome back to the Reasonable Truth podcast. We have with us Professor Kevin Lewis from Biola University, and we are talking today about demonology in the occult. A little trivia for those of you who don't know. Today is actually October 31st. We're actually recording it on Halloween Day. How about that? I was kind of hoping to do this a lot sooner and get it released on Halloween Day, but we couldn't do that. But I don't know. By the time you guys listen to this, it's going to be, much later. So I guess it doesn't matter. Anyways, let's get back into this topic. Professor Lewis, we talked about some very interesting stuff before the break. We talked about just kind of the appeal toward occultism and, why people get into these kind of things. And we talked about psychosomatics and just substance dualism and the nature of angels and demons and things like that. And I kind of want to bring it down a little bit in this second half and speak more specifically on a practical level to Christian brothers and sisters. So let's talk about some, we ended the last segment with Hollywood and how the media perception of these issues can sometimes, alter the ways we think about it as well. So let's just launch pad straight from there. What are some common Christian misconceptions about this whole topic about demonology and occultism?
Okay. Yeah. As far as misconceptions, I mean, there are plenty. I think before the break, we ended with what's the attraction of it to folks. So which one do you want to hit, the attraction part or the misconceptions?
I think you unpacked the attraction part some, but go ahead. You can unpack that some more, and then
Yeah.
let's go to that.
The attraction part, and this is actually sort of like I said, it's the final issue in all this. Like I said, it's where Christianity is strong, it suppresses the occult. But then when the church is weak, and here's the key: the church exists, right, for the gospel to do what? To fix the sin problems with the human race. So when we look at Why does someone become a Christian? Answer: to fix the effects of the fall. Tell you what we had in the garden was peace, security, joy, love. We had knowledge that we were important. Our identities were fine. We didn't have to fear death. We didn't do any of that. Our physical bodies weren't, now you look at the effects of the fall. What do you have? You have a lot of pain physically, spiritually, a lot of insecurity, a lot of worry about, people trying to hurt you. So you don't have the love, the joy, the peace, again, the idea, the satisfaction in life. So the question of, why do people turn to anything, cults, the occult, or anything, is to fix the effects of the fall. So when you're dealing in think about this. The number one area of occultism, you'd probably guess it, is what? Healing magic.
Yeah.
Why? Virtually everybody in the world is, they got something going on wrong with their bodies. So
Right.
what do you have? So every polytheistic pagan, neo-pagan, has a shaman, right? It's like, how do I don't feel good. How do I fix this? So healing magic is number one, but then what are the other ones? Defense magic.
Right.
Okay, what do we do? This tribe is going to attack us, and you're going to rape our women and take our children and kill the men. How do we protect ourselves?
Right.
So you start going down the list, and all of a sudden it's every other human need that people have. It's like, well, I want power to protect myself, the need to be loved. Love potion number 9, right?
Right.
Okay. And by the way, this is something too, is on a pastoral note, I think Christians need to be very careful because I hear believers, unbelievers, but especially for believers, talk about, quote, how beautiful someone is or how attractive they are. Frankly, there are just a lot of people who are physically unattractive.
Right.
And when they hear from us, from people, it's like, all the people who are, quote, just born good looking, right? I'm not in that class, but, there are a lot of people who feel bad with their identity. There are people who are the most spiritually, emotionally, and every other way attractive and beautiful, but physically they're not as much. And then, as you know, I've met those people too. They're some of the most beautiful people in the world and the ugliest people on the inside, the most horrible. But those are the people who get all the attention if they're physically beautiful. So that's why we think about the very notion of having a sense of purpose in life, of importance and all that. See, the occult promises, and if you get enough, again, magic, divination, spiritism, the three basic, categories of occultic practice. Magic and sorcery. If you get enough power, you can make just about anything happen.
Right.
Yeah. If you get enough knowledge, divination, right, you can know, hidden truths. What are those winning lottery numbers, right? And all that. And to get the knowledge and power, sometimes what do? You go talk to spirits who can either do something for you, right, provide the power, or give you the knowledge that you need.
Right.
And that's what makes it attractive to people who are hurting. Someone's promising you a quick fix. But see, that's also why you have gambling addicts. That's why you have, this is the promise, the quick fix. And what's also important is rebellion is of the sin of witchcraft. We're going to give you power and knowledge to get whatever you want and satisfy not only real needs, but also whatever your sinful desires are, as long as you get enough knowledge and power. So it's back to Genesis 3, the day you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And you will have the power and ability you won't have to repent of anything. You don't have to submit yourself to anything. You can be your own God.
Right.
And control your own little world. That's the attraction of the occult.
Right. The occult. It's the oldest carrot in the book. Right. When Satan said, "You too can be like God." He was basically offering knowledge and power to the first humans. But interestingly enough, like even if we think about like world situations like politics and foreign policy kind of scenarios, we've always had like a history of like invasions or, like espionages during the Cold War, and, or even like if you bring it down kind of on a basic micro level to like identity theft. What is kind of the animating principle behind that is this pursuit for the acquisition of knowledge and power. If you get knowledge, if you get some person's identity, you get their personal information, now you can do things with that. Similarly with espionage, right? You tap into a country's foreign secrets and things like that. Now you can control that country. The entire human anthropological kind of bent got twisted in the garden, and everything we do after that is completely geared toward acquiring knowledge and power. Would you say that's fairly correct?
Yeah, I think it's correct. And ultimately, what people are seeking is control and freedom, but not in a biblical way. I want to be able to control my surroundings and then be free to do whatever I want within this controlled environment. And that's, that leads to everything. If I can get enough wealth, knowledge, power, all these things, then I get to live in my little perceptual bubble, right? Where no one's going to hurt me. I have everything I need. You can buy friends, you can buy, people who will pretend to be your friend, your wife, and everything else for the right amount of money and power. And then you'll have this temporary illusion of happiness and satisfaction.
Carlos, any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's clear. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so let's talk about what does this mean for the believer's authority. Now, I've been having some conversations with someone from my extended family, and she was talking to me about this person that she's recently come in contact with, and she senses that there's some demonic oppression going on over there. She doesn't think it's direct possession or anything like that, but she does feel this deep need to sort of reach out to this person, but she doesn't know where to start. So let's just hit that question straight on. If you come across someone who you have a sense, you obviously run it through the theological grid and you realize, okay, there's something else going on here.
Yeah.
What is the first step to that kind of spiritual warfare? What does that look like practically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and like I say, we'll have to have part 2, 3, and 4 to completely cover it.
We might end up doing that. We'll see.
Yeah, to lay a foundation, because this is just part of doing systematic theology. How do you have a comprehensive, integrated approach to dealing with everything, not only in theory but in practice? So to begin to think about something like this, the first thing is going to be that, how about we wake the church up to actually make disciples who understand this stuff?
Yes.
Our biggest problem is ignorance. My people perish for lack of knowledge. And you can talk about whatever the content. Yes, people are ignorant. They don't know enough. And one of the biggest problems with dealing with the demonic is that there's just so much ignorance, and the ignorance breeds fear. And frankly, that's the same thing we think about culture issues. I mean, if you're, me growing up in high school, all I know is, you drive downtown or into, hey, everybody's a gang member. Hey, everybody's this. You don't know. So you have these unfounded fears because you don't know who's good, who's bad. So you fear everything and mislabel everything. So that's why number one is you need discipleship. This is what demons really are. This is who you really are. And then you can appropriately, think, what can demons do? What happens if I get an attack? What happens if some punks in your neighborhood start throwing rocks at your window at night?
Right.
Yeah. See, the fact is, you recognize what the problem is. And then we know what you call the police. You set up security cameras. You go out and do anything lawful you can to stop it, get appropriate punishment. And usually what you find out is most criminals are cowards. They go on to easy targets. So, demons, again, they tend to prey on people who are easy targets. And, when you get someone who knows what they're doing, know what it means to have authority in Christ, you recognize the stuff immediately that's going on, and you use your authority in Christ. Just like you hear pebbles against your window, you're trained. You go outside, you eyeball them and say, look, you're not coming back. I got your picture. I took your picture here. I just called the cops. We're going to deal with this. You guys come back, next time we're pressing charges. They're just going to go to an easier mark. So
Sure.
now that's not true for every criminal, but for the most of them, they're cowards. They go to easy targets. They're bullies. So on this, the place to start is people got to get trained. And this is a problem with the modern evangelical church, is that we tend to do, the good ones will have lots and lots and lots and lots of Bible study over and over and over. We go to Genesis to Revelation, but never do systematic theology, apologetics, ethics, or a spiritual warfare class. It's just we constantly go through one biblical book after the other. And then hopefully in that 7 to 10 year period, someone hits a sermon on how to deal with demons or something. Instead of directly saying, look, I'm going to teach you how to be a moral person. We're going to do ethics. I'm going to teach you about spiritual warfare. I'm going to teach you how to do apologetics as part of, a intentional discipleship. And while the Bible is the foundation, we've got a lot of directed and applied areas to focus on. So once you do that, I encourage people, my website, theolaw.org, theolaw.org. I've got my syllabi or my teaching handouts there. Go there and download. If you're interested in this, you'll download the angelology handout, the demonology handout, the occult handout, the occult ABCs, and the spiritual warfare handout. And even just reading through them, you'll get an idea of here's what angels and demons can do, the occult ABCs. Now I've got 160 different issues that I can start asking the person that I think might be demonically affected. Read through this list. Have you been involved in fill in the blank? I mean, overt stuff, witchcraft, Ouija boards.
Right.
An event. It's amazing how people they start checking the boxes. Oh yeah, 2 months ago I went to a thing and we did this. It's like, yeah. Did you go to some Native American reservation and buy a dream catcher and hang it on your wall?
Right.
I mean, I've had folks who've done that. They went in the gift shop, bought a dream catcher. You got to remember that's part of spirit world. I went to Africa and bought a ritual mask in one of the shop. Get rid of it, man. Otherwise, you get Jim Carrey coming to your house. You don't want that. So
okay, so let me do this. Let me push back a little bit. So let me play devil's advocate. No pun intended. So Scripture talks about we have the authority to trample over all these things, snakes, and take authority over demons and all these things, and we see that kind of practice in the New Testament as well. But where's that fine line? Because I think some people take that and they immediately think they're Batman. They're like, I'm going to be this lone crusader who's just going to go up against the entire spiritual for the principalities and powers of darkness, and I got this because the Bible says I have the authority to do it, and so I'm going to single-handedly go and do it. And then they kind of crash and burn. So where's that line of discernment as to, because even the Archangel Michael in Jude, right, he says he dared not rebuke the devil, but said the Lord rebuke him. So how can Christians correctly think about this and not turn into like Batman, like crusaders?
Again, it's right back to the original. Lots of good teaching, good, comprehensive, clear teaching on the subject, because most people go in with complete ignorance, or they get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And here's the analogy, okay? First of all, when you say authority is not power. And
Correct.
This is probably the biggest issue that people confuse, okay? Power is the capacity of a being or thing to produce effects. So the greater the power, the greater effect you can produce. So God being omnipotent, God can do all things that are logically possible and doesn't violate his nature, which including, create an entire universe ex nihilo, okay? Right. Raise people from the dead. I mean, so when you think about that, to the ability to produce effects, when you're talking about making a demon leave, okay, we have no power. Our soul doesn't reach out and grab the demon and slap him around and drag him away from the person.
That's right. Yes.
See, that would be cause and effect with again, a substance having causal powers and acting on something else to produce an effect. And again, so you start with very simple explanations like this: is, hey, look, moron, you have no power. So now you get into what authority is. First of all, authority is simply the right to command with a corresponding, duty to obey that command by the one commanded. And also, authority has the right. There's enforcement that goes with commands, and usually punishment and reward and things like that. So
Also
this is like,
delegated authority.
right. So you start with Romans 13:1. All authority comes from God. Period. The self-existing eternal creator is the one in whom all authority rests, and every other created being, wherever you're at in the hierarchy, whether it's president, pastor, or parent, you have a delegated or imputed authority, and there's always a higher authority than you to which you have to answer. So that's why when you look at the concept of exercising authority, we're not exercising power. It's the concept there of exousia in the scripture is the right to command, but we're not the ones who are going to be the enforcers.
Right.
So this is why we go back to our model of, and again, we go back to our model of, which after my studies in this, I'm convinced that the demonic world is much like the fallen human world, is that you've got different levels of criminals in sin. You've got those who, you think about this, you've got, self-righteous people. I would never do that. They're spiritually arrogant or whatever, all the way to people who like to torture babies for fun and, serial murderers and torturers.
Right.
And everything in between. Not all evil is the same. And not every fallen, person engages in the same kind of evil. So this is why you're going to get different types of evil and interactions with the demonic world, just like you are with the criminal world in the human race. Now, that said, now you go to the concept of authority and power, and you have to make that clear. Because we're Christians, now we're essentially, you just went through your police academy, now you're post-certified, and now you're on the God squad now. Okay, you have your badge of authority, right? Because now you're a deputy. Okay, now this is why when we think about delegated or imputed authority, every Christian has the same level of authority to command a demon as everyone else. Now you think about this, the captain of the police department and the first day rookie have the same powers of arrest.
Correct.
Right? Because the authority rests with the state. Okay? And they are agents of the state.
Right.
Now, while there's a hierarchy of command on how you exercise that authority, the authority is the same. So a first day rookie can arrest a gang member as well as the captain. So now the question comes to, all right, what kind of criminal are you dealing with? And this is where you get into rational evil versus irrational evil.
Right.
So see, and again, the analogy I give here is that you got, someone robbing a bank. Well, when the cops show up, the rational criminals know they got caught when they say stop, hands up, surrender. A rational criminal, they know, look, they're going to call the SWAT.
There's no way out.
They're going to
Right.
call the helicopters. We give up now or it becomes worse for us. And then we better call Saul, right, to get us out of jail. But see, that's the rational criminal. And even though they did something wrong, they know they're rational enough that they minimize the consequences by recognizing and voluntarily complying with legitimate authoritative commands, because it minimizes the sentence of the punishment.
Right.
Irrational. See, now fast forward. Now you have the irrational bank robbers, where now surrender. You got the guns on you. You're not getting out. The building's surrounded. Okay. So now what happens is, no way. So now the hostages come. So now the SWAT team comes, and now they got 12 helicopters around, and now they got the armored vehicles, and now they got now they got tear gas. Now they got, It's all this. So in there with the irrational evil, you don't see because they fear greater consequences instead of limited temporary ones. The rational criminal voluntarily complies with a lawful order, whereas the irrational ones see now they're not going to voluntarily comply, and under their own power, they're going to leave, they're going to do whatever. See, irrational now, what happens now? Now the SWAT team gasses the bank, swarms them, right? And then you have, 4, 5, or 6 on one swarming each criminal, and then they're cuffed, and then they're dragged out of the building. See, there you have to have, because there wasn't voluntary and rational recognition of
You have to
authority,
use deadly force. Yeah.
you had to have a direct application of power from one substance, we hear one rational being or substance, upon another that can act upon the other. And in this case, spiritually remove, right, this being who is affecting this person. So for demon possession, see, I mean, they recognize Christ's authority and left.
Right.
But see, you also have, and that's why, again, we see glimpses of the angelic and demonic world, because the Bible is a book about human beings and God. And all the angels and demons stories are just incidental to what God is doing with us. It's not a book of the history of angels and fallen angels and what's going on with them. So we have an imperfect and more, sort of imperfect and imprecise and incomplete account of the angelic and demonic world. But we get a few passages like, the people come back and say, hey, we tried to cast out this demon, it wouldn't come out. Well, this kind only comes out by prayer. And then, the variant adds fasting to that. Now, when I look at something like that, I just look at, well, how's the criminal world work? Irrational and rational criminals. Well, okay, this criminal didn't recognize my voluntary authority. So what's the prayer part? God, you got to deal with this directly because this criminal isn't complying. So whether it's by the direct application of the power of the Holy Spirit, or God sends, the God squad, Michael and Gabriel and whoever, to, how you move a non-physical substance from one place to the next so that there is no manifestation and interaction of a substance with an illocal presence. Nobody, we don't know. That's one of the questions I have in theology 1,000,001 in heaven when I get there, how this stuff works. But we do know that, like with the Gerasene Gadarene demoniacs, they recognized the authority of Christ. They left, and then they traversed a certain amount of distance physically. Now, again, how those two substances overlap, where one's physical, one isn't, and then there's movement in the spiritual world, where now they're in union with and manifesting a presence in this human being, and then they moved across a field and now are united with a pig and now possess the pig and, cause suicide, pigicide, right? So, but either way, so this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. Well, to me, there's the irrational demon who's not thinking about the long-term consequences and extra punishment.
Right.
So laying that foundation, what you have now is, somebody, like I said, they just get their first spiritual warfare lesson, or they're new Christians. They don't understand all this stuff. They don't understand that there are really bad, mean, evil criminals that, you go there and it's like I've been teaching this demonology occult class for decades. And when I admitted undergrads to it before, I'd have half undergrads and half grads. These kids were 18, 19, 20 years old. They're coming in. It's like, so when are we going to see a demon? Hey, you going to bring a satanic Bible to class? Like, I don't think you guys understand. You talk to people in law enforcement, you're dealing with demons. You're basically dealing with mafia leaders. Right. Even in the young earth creationist view, where the world is 20,000 years old, you have fallen angels. Remember, Satan is in the garden before the fall of Adam and Eve. That was 10 to 20,000 years ago. You have criminals that have been spending 20,000 years habituating evil in their character. I mean, the worst gang members today maybe have 50, 60 years to
Right.
be that evil. And you talk, I know people who have worked in, jails, prisons, corrections. They said there are parts of the prison where these gang leaders are, even the sheriffs and the deputies don't want to go there because you can feel the evil. It's horrible.
Right.
Nobody wants to go deal with gang members. It's not fun. It's
Right.
not something you walk in, I'm Batman, right? You're not Batman.
Right.
If you're
Exactly.
dealing with the who cares about authority gang members.
Right. You're not Batman, but you're also not dealing with Casper or Slimer or something. They're dealing with
That's
much more
exactly
malevolent
right. And
being.
so,
As we kind of wrap it up here, Carlos, you said you had a question you wanted to bring up. Let's talk about that and let's
Yeah.
wrap this up.
but
So
don't
given that,
but don't do any rap while you're wrapping it up. I
no,
just
no, no. I'll bust out some Shaolin.
I was
No.
going to say, man, just Carlos wrapping it up.
But thinking about how we're dealing with today being as a culture, we celebrate Reformation Day, but the culture does Halloween. So
Right.
how should Christians engage with and understand their involvement in Halloween? Is it okay for them to participate in these activities? Do they redeem the culture? How do they deal with this whole Halloween
Yeah.
festivity?
Yeah, good question on that.
A great
And the
question.
answer is I think there's lots and lots and lots of different ways to be productive, to be helpful, to, give a good witness, to, it's the same way with anything in our lives and any ministry and any witness. Who are you dealing with? Where are the people at? Uh it's all the way from, because you got to think too, Christmas is coming up. Oh, I'm not going to do a Christmas tree. Oh, I'm not going to do this. Oh, it's Saturnalia, it was a pagan holiday, and all this stuff. Well, today is Reformation Day. It's also was All Hallows Eve. Tomorrow is All Saints Day, and but does most of the culture know that? Do the parents who come and knock on your doors, do they need to get a rebuke, from you? It's like, we don't do this because it's satanic. And then
Right.
everybody in the neighborhood goes, man, that's that cranky old dude who's a Christian. Now, stuff like this without putting, witches and, without glorifying demonology and the occult. I'm going to go hand out candy after this. I'm going to smile I might even put my pirate hat on or something, and just have fun, right? Do playtime. I'm not, there can be godly fantasy, godly fun without directly or indirectly acknowledging or encouraging the world of paganism, neo-paganism, and the occult. So, and there are clear lines you can cross. Yeah, don't go to a séance or a Ouija board, game, and there are probably characters, that at some point you can cross the line. But that's the question of, should I let my kids, read the Harry Potter books and watch the movies? And you're going to get different answers from different Christians on that. I let my kids watch it and read the books, and I read them too. And you know, why? Because there's clearly fantasy, worldview, morality tale kinds of stuff, and then there's the stuff that actually encourages real stuff. And for the people who are concerned about that, again, are you actually encouraging the occult because you read something that's clearly fantasy, that's a morality tale? Well, if so, get rid of the Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's his works on the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Chronicles of Narnia, because those are also fantasy tales that have the occult in it and have quote unquote Christian morality in it. So either way, each instance is going to be, there's the big picture, there's clearly yes, clearly no. But the big thing for the Christian is if you're not sure, don't do it.
That's good. Well, thank you so much, Professor Lewis. Really appreciate it. Any last words of encouragement you want to give believers when it comes to, like you said something earlier that I thought was really profound. We tend to be afraid of things that we don't understand. So, what is like a parting word of wisdom for Christians when it comes to this area of demonology and the occult?
Well, I mean, it's what I've said a couple of times throughout your podcast here is that get trained, get informed, get trained, get informed. The only cure for ignorance is teaching. And I can tell you this, one of the biggest problems is we do not have churches that take discipleship and training seriously. There are a lot of good ones out there, but there are a lot of the ones that don't. And even the ones that do, it's like, hey, we're having a 4-week series on this. It's like, well, 4 weeks isn't enough for someone to become an expert or even competent in some of these areas. It's just, hey, we covered the bases, we checked the box, we're going on to the next topic. So part of it is that, and by the way, this is why a lot of these parachurch ministries and nonprofits, like my Institute for Theology and Law, Reasonable Truth, I can tell you a lot of folks in our MA apologetics program, even though most of them are going to go on for PhDs, they go into ministries of the church, a lot of people are there because they couldn't get the advanced discipleship from their own local church. They had to go outside their own local church. So if you think your church needs some help in that area, and I can tell you this as well, a lot of pastors are overworked. They've got too much to do. And, to say, well, we want to add 5 or 6 more classes or things like that. Well, they don't have the money. They don't have the budget. But this is why, well, contact us, contact Reasonable Truth, contact the Institute for Theology and Law. Bring us in. We have conferences. I plan on eventually putting all my curriculum for free on my website. So you want a course in this, with, Prashanth and Carlos, the smiling faces, we can go on there and, put it on there and people can get training for free and not have to worry about, answering that question. So the biggest issue is if you're not getting it in your local church, start by contacting us and we can refer you to reading lists, video lectures, and so on and so forth that'll help you. Because otherwise you'll still be ignorant and afraid and not know what to do.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and Carlos and I have been saying this for a long time as well to a lot of people we talk to. There is no shortcut to this. If we want to become winsome ambassadors, if we want to become soldiers, warriors for the kingdom, there is no shortcut. We have to train, we have to equip ourselves, we have to learn, and that's the only way moving forward. Well, that's it for today. Carlos, thank you for joining us, buddy. I appreciate it. And Professor Lewis, thank you so much for joining us as well. So wonderful to have you, and we should do this again sometime on a more cheerful topic. Maybe next time, we'll see. But anyways,
cheerful. By the way, on the close on that, whooping the devil and being able to defeat your enemy is a pretty cheerful topic.
Woo! That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Perspective on it. It's like, hey, you just do this right. You just figured out how to defeat evil.
That's right. That's right. All right. I stand corrected. Well, thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed that episode of the Reasonable Truth Podcast. If you did, make sure to follow us on Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and share it with your friends and family. For more information on the ministry, visit reasonabletruth.org. That's reasonabletruth.org. And until next time, keep the faith and see you on our next episode of the Reasonable Truth Podcast.